How do you see the current political and social crisis in Nepal? And what do you think are its deeper structural causes?
Well, look, in 2015, Nepal had a new constitution. This was a constitution hard fought by democratic and left forces. I mean, people struggled for decades to end dictatorship, to end the monarchy, and they were able to write a really good constitution in 2015, only 10 years ago. Just before the constitution was enacted, there was an enormous earthquake in the Gurkha region of Nepal. About hundreds of thousands of people lost their homes, over 10,000 people died, and so on. It was the birth pangs of a very difficult process of transition for a country that has very hard terrain. There's mountains all across the country, a high rate of inequality and child poverty, and so on. A left was able to come into parliament in 2017, capturing 3/4 of the parliament. I mean, it was incredible. 2018, all the different groups of the left united to form one communist party in 2018, but they were not able to captivate or put together an agenda, a comprehensive agenda to deal with Nepal's problems. The party fell apart in 2021. And since then, there's been a series of governments which have not been able to really address the people's issue. Breno, the median age in Nepal is 25. That means half the population is under 25. Compelling problem is youth unemployment. Almost 1 million of the Nepali people have been in and out of the country. At any one time, 500,000 people are working in really terrible jobs in the Gulf states, in India, and so on, jobs that are not commensurate with their training. And so the current center-right government, a government uniting a part of the communists with the Nepali Congress, it's actually a center-right government, faced a series of challenges, popular uprisings, also challenges from the hard right, who wanted to bring back the monarchy. And this culminated in this government doing something really stupid, which is banning a series of social media channels. Extremely stupid decision, led to much more fierce protests. The government then did the next stupid thing, which is authorized police firing on the crowds, killing about 19-20 people. And then, of course, they were overthrown. And right now, the military is holding charge. They are looking for an interim president or a prime minister. It's not sure what's going to happen in the country. It's very fluid, the situation. But basically, it's a situation where people highly, motivated with their aspirations are not having them met. And interference from India to some extent played a role in this. But what we have is really a kind of chaos with the military in charge.
Would you say there is something like a color revolution taking place in Nepal?
Well, it depends how you describe color revolution. It's certainly not the case that a foreign power has instigated the uprising, has actually created the uprising. I always say that the ants come under the door into your kitchen if your kitchen is not clean. You should first clean your kitchen. Don't blame the ants for coming in and then bringing in the rats and others. You see, you have to clean your kitchen. And the governments that have been there over the last decade have not been able to deal with issues of corruption, issues of poverty. It's true, child poverty was decreased, but overall poverty was not decreased. And I have to say, one of the most reliable politicians in Nepal, Narayan Kazi, also known as Prakash, a Maoist leader, was the home minister. And while he was the home minister in 2023-24, he pushed for corruption investigations of people in all political parties. And guess what happened to him? He was removed from his position. So you can see in this instance that had somebody like Narayan Kazi been allowed to do his work, he might have met some of the people's aspirations. But no, It didn't meet the aspirations, and you opened the door for external powers to enter. Is that a color revolution? I don't know. I think we need to clean our houses a lot better before we complain about people sending the rats into our homes.
Do you think Nepal could end up becoming another front in the new Cold War between Washington and Beijing?
Well, in fact, Nepal has already been in that position. It's in a tough position because it's caught between India and China. A very important scholar wrote a book about Burma called Between India and China, suggesting it's tough for Burma. If it's tough for Burma, it's tough for Nepal. Nepal is a country with the Himalayas coming as an enormous barrier, about 3/4 of the way up the country. And on the other side, near the Chinese border, there was a discovery in the province of Mustang a few years ago, about 11 years ago, of uranium, high quality uranium. This has been a point of some contest between the United States and Nepal. They don't want the Nepalis to sell it to the Chinese because it is actually easier to sell that uranium to China. There's no Himalayas blocking it than to sell it anywhere else. Anyway, there are lots of compelling issues, and the United States pushed Nepal to join the Millennium Challenge Corporation, which is the US version of the Belt and Road Initiative. And the idea of this Millennium Challenge Corporation was to build power lines to go to India, to sell India cut price energy from Nepal. Well, when this was passed by the government, about maybe 8 years ago, there were enormous protests around the country. This year, this center-right government welcomed the vice president of the Millennium Challenge Corporation to Kathmandu. So, this government, by the way, this center-right government that has been overthrown was almost pro-US. That's why I'm always surprised when people say, well, it's a US color revolution. Why would the United States have wasted its assets to overthrow a government which is basically, in the end, pro-US, somewhat anti-India? Because in Nepal, the real challenge, Breno, isn't between US and China. It's between US and India. United States wants to dominate Nepal, but India also wants to dominate Nepal. And the real, chessboard challenge in Nepal has been US versus India, not US versus China. That's a secondary issue, a secondary contradiction.
Which is China's strategy to Nepal?
That's a very good question. And it's very difficult to answer that question precisely because, there is no white paper from the Chinese government. This is our approach to Nepal. The Chinese always say, we will assist the Nepalis, following the so-called 5 no's principle. No interference with Nepal's domestic affairs, no interference with how Nepal decides to develop, no interference with, with foreign aid and so on. That's the basic approach. When I've asked this question to people in the know at the, say, Chinese Foreign Ministry, South Asian department, their view is that they would like to see stability in Nepal. And I mean, surely that's what anybody would like to see, but stability with development. The question is, what is going to come of this development? So the Chinese had proposed some time back, they built this incredible train that goes from lowland China up to Lhasa in Tibet, to run a train from Lhasa to Pokhran and eventually Kathmandu. It would be an amazing feat of engineering and incredible for Nepal to have a train linking it to China. Well, these things have always been on hold because you don't really have a government in Nepal, haven't had one. Even the most left government hasn't said, look, we would like to do these things with China because they don't want to also, really annoy India or the United States. You got to understand that over the last several decades, anytime the Nepali government does anything that annoys the Indians, India closes the border. And when India closes the border, Nepal, which is a landlocked country, is starved of goods and services. It becomes very difficult for Nepal to get basic things, fuel, and so on. So nobody wants to annoy India. And with India having a far-right government, it's hard for the Nepali government, even a left government, to say we would like to do things with China, at the cost of relations with India or the United States?